I found an old family journal about the Black Plague. I should have kept it sealed. I never expected to find anything of significance while clearing out my great-aunt Theodora's house in Yorkshire. The elderly woman had lived alone for decades in the sprawling Victorian mansion, and after her passing at the age of 94, the task of sorting through her belongings fell to me. Most of her possessions were exactly what you'd expect: dusty furniture, outdated clothes, and box after box of faded photographs. But in the attic, buried beneath a stack of moldering blankets, I found something extraordinary. A leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. The cover was unmarked, save for a single name written in flowing script: Aldrich Blackwood, 1665. My hands trembled as I opened it. Aldrich Blackwood had been a distant ancestor, a physician who lived through the Great Plague of London. I'd heard stories about him growing up, but I never knew any personal accounts had survived. The pages were remarkably well preserved, though the ink had faded to a rusty brown in places. As I began to read, I realized with growing unease that this was no ordinary physician's diary. 12th of May, 1665. Today I witnessed something that defies all medical knowledge I possess. The plague has begun to spread through London streets, as we all feared it would. But there is something different about this outbreak. Something that fills me with a deep and gnawing dread. I was called to attend young Thomas Whitmore, son of the merchant on Bread Street. The boy presented with the typical symptoms: fever, chills, and a small swelling in his neck. But when I examined the bubo more closely, I observed movement beneath the skin. Not the usual pulsing of infected tissue, but something deliberate, purposeful. When I lanced the swelling, what emerged was not merely pus and blood. I shall document this precisely, though my hand shakes to write it. The infected matter seemed to writhe of its own accord, and within it, I glimpsed what appeared to be minute, thread-like structures, twisting and coiling like tiny eels. Young Thomas expired within hours. His father begged me to examine the body, convinced some curse had befallen his son. I agreed, though I now wish I hadn't. The boy's lymph nodes, when extracted, contained more of these strange fibers. Under my microscope, they appeared almost crystalline, with complex branching patterns, unlike anything I've encountered in my studies of the disease. I have preserved several samples. God forgive me, but I must understand what this is. 15th of May, 1665. 3 more cases today, all showing the same peculiar characteristics. The fibers appear in every sample I examine. They seem to grow more complex, more organized, with each passing day. I've begun sketching their patterns, though I fear my drawings do not do justice to their bizarre intricacy. My colleague, Dr. Edmund Halsey, believes I'm allowing fear and exhaustion to cloud my judgment. He claims I'm seeing patterns where none exist, that these are merely the typical signs of bubonic plague. But he hasn't observed them under the microscope as I have. He hasn't seen them move. I must document something else, though I hesitate to commit it to paper. The infected seem to share a common behavior in their final hours. They speak of visions, not the usual fevered hallucinations, but specific, consistent images. They describe vast networks of tunnels, branching endlessly beneath the earth. They whisper about something moving through these passages, something ancient that has been waiting. I tell myself these are merely the ravings of dying minds. Yet each patient describes the same scenes, down to the smallest detail. How can this be? 20th of May, 1665. I have made a terrible discovery. The samples I preserved, they've changed. The fibers have grown more numerous, forming intricate patterns that seem almost like writing in a language I cannot read. When I examine them, I feel a curious sensation, as if something is attempting to communicate through these bizarre structures. More disturbing still are the rats. London has always been plagued by them, but their behavior has become increasingly erratic. They gather in large groups, moving with an unnatural coordination. Yesterday, I observed a group of them in my laboratory, clustered around the cabinet where I keep my samples. They seemed to be listening for something. I've begun to experience strange dreams. I see the tunnels my patients described, endless passages that seem to pulse with their own heartbeat. Sometimes, I hear whispers in languages that have never been spoken by human tongues. I tell myself this is merely the result of exhaustion and stress. But deep down, I know better. 25th of May, 1665. The infection rate is growing exponentially, but that is not what truly terrifies me. It's the patterns. They're everywhere now, in the spread of the disease through the city, in the way the rats move through the streets, in the very arrangement of the bodies we collect each morning. Everything follows the same branching structure I first observed in those tissue samples. I've started mapping these patterns, and what emerges is impossible to ignore. The disease isn't spreading randomly. It's creating something, building something, using us as its medium. Dr. Halsey visited again today. He seemed troubled by my research, especially my maps and drawings. He suggested I take some time to rest, mentioned that many physicians have been driven to madness by the horrors we witness. But his eyes lingered too long on my samples, and I noticed his hands trembling as he spoke. After he left, I discovered several of my samples were missing. 1st of June, 1665. I can no longer sleep. The dreams have become too intense, too real. In them, I walk through those endless tunnels, following the branching patterns that have become so familiar. But now I understand what they are. A root system, spreading through the very foundations of our city. And at the center of it all, something waits. Something that has been growing, feeding, preparing. The pattern of the infection, when mapped across London, creates a perfect replica of the structures I've observed in my samples. We are not dealing with a mere disease. We are dealing with something that thinks, that plans, that has been waiting in the earth since long before humans walked upon it. I've discovered references in ancient texts to similar outbreaks throughout history. The Black Death wasn't the first manifestation of this entity. It has emerged again and again, each time growing more complex, more organized, learning from each attempt. Today I visited the Whitmores again. The entire family is now infected, but they're not dying. They're changing. The fibrous growths have spread throughout their bodies, visible beneath their skin like dark rivers. They speak in unison now, describing the same visions I see in my dreams. They told me it's almost ready, that soon it will be complete. I must do something, but who would believe me? How can I explain that what we call the plague is merely the visible portion of something far larger, far older, far more terrifying than we could ever imagine? 3rd of June, 1665. Dr. Halsey came to my house tonight, wild-eyed and rambling. He had taken my samples to study them himself, to prove me wrong. Instead, he found exactly what I had described, but he went further in his experiments than I had dared. He claims to have decoded the patterns, to have understood the messages they contain. What he told me cannot be true, must not be true, but it explains everything. The consistent visions, the coordinated behavior of the infected, the precise patterns of the disease's spread. We are not dealing with a plague at all. We are dealing with something that has been waiting beneath our feet for millennia, slowly building itself, using human bodies as raw material. The fibers we've observed are not symptoms of the disease. They are its true form, a vast network that connects all the infected into a single, growing organism. And now, after centuries of preparation, it's finally ready to. The entry ends abruptly here, the pen having skittered across the page in a jagged line. 4th of June, 1665. I write this in haste. They are coming for me. I can hear them in the streets below. Not just the rats now, but the infected themselves, moving with that same horrible coordination. Dr. Halsey is with them. I saw him through my window, his skin rippling with those familiar patterns. I've hidden my research as best I can. This journal will go to my sister in Yorkshire, along with instructions that it should be preserved, but never read. Some knowledge is too dangerous. The patterns are complete. The network is fully formed. Whatever has been growing beneath London is ready to emerge, to transform from an invisible web into something far more terrible. I understand now why the infected didn't die, why they changed instead. They were never meant to die. They were meant to become part of it. And now, I hear them on the stairs. Rats came first, hundreds of them, their eyes gleaming with an intelligence that should not exist in such creatures. Behind them, I hear the shuffling steps of the infected. To whoever finds this journal, burn it. Burn it and forget everything you've read. Some things should remain buried. Some knowledge should stay hidden. The patterns are everywhere now. Once you begin to see them, you can never stop. They're in the very fabric of our world, waiting to be activated, waiting to spread, waiting to. The writing ends here, replaced by a series of intricate, branching patterns, drawn in what appears to be dried blood. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. I told myself it was just the ravings of a man driven mad by the horrors of the plague. But as I set it down, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, on my wrist, where I'd been resting it against the page, was a small, dark mark. When I looked closer, I could see thin, thread-like lines beginning to spread beneath my skin, forming familiar branching patterns. I spent the next 3 days convincing myself the mark on my wrist was nothing. A trick of the light, perhaps, or an allergic reaction to the old leather binding. But on the 4th morning, I could no longer deny what I was seeing. The pattern had spread halfway up my forearm, dark lines branching beneath my skin like tiny roots. My medical training made it impossible to ignore the implications. The branching pattern followed my lymphatic system perfectly, tracing paths between my lymph nodes that I'd memorized in anatomy classes. But there was something else, something that sent ice through my veins. The pattern wasn't just following my lymphatic system, it was extending it, creating new pathways that shouldn't exist. I returned to Theodora's house, desperate to find anything else that might explain what was happening to me. This time, I searched the attic methodically, checking every box, every corner. Behind a false panel in the wall, I found a metal strongbox. Inside were more documents, letters, hospital records, and most importantly, a series of correspondence between my great-aunt and someone named Professor Helena Blackwood, dated 1943, 15th September 1943. Dear Theodora, I must thank you for sending me Aldrich's journal. As the last practicing physician in the Blackwood line, I've long suspected our family's connection to the Great Plague went deeper than historical record suggests. Your discovery confirms my worst fears. I've spent the last 20 years studying unusual disease patterns across Europe, focusing particularly on incidents that mirror the 1665 outbreak. What I've found is deeply troubling. The branching patterns Aldrich documented have appeared repeatedly throughout history, always in isolated incidents that were quickly covered up or dismissed as medical curiosities. Enclosed are my notes from a case in Prague, 1928. A young girl presented with what appeared to be severe lymphatic inflammation. Within days, similar cases appeared throughout her neighborhood. The attending physician documented branching patterns identical to those in Aldrich's drawings. But here's what truly terrifies me. He also documented instances of simultaneous movement among the infected. 37 patients spread across 3 hospitals, all turning their heads at exactly the same moment to look in the same direction, all blinking in perfect unison. The outbreak was contained only when the entire neighborhood was quarantined and dealt with. The official record lists it as a tragic fire. But that's not all. I've found references to similar incidents dating back to ancient Rome. They called it morbus radicus, the root disease. The symptoms are always the same: the branching patterns, the coordinated behavior, the whispered descriptions of vast underground networks. I believe what Aldrich encountered wasn't an isolated incident. It was merely one emergence of something that has been with us throughout human history, something that uses disease as a mechanism for, I hesitate to use the word, but I can think of no other that fits: colonization. Your loving cousin, Helena. There were more letters, but what caught my eye was a folder of medical photographs, paper-clipped to the next page. They were from various time periods, starting with grainy images from the 1920s and progressing to clearer, more recent shots. Each showed the same thing: patients with distinctive branching patterns visible beneath their skin. The most recent photos were from a small outbreak in northern England in 1981. The patterns were identical to what was now spreading up my arm. But it was the last item in the box that truly shook me. A modern medical report, dated just 3 years ago, from a laboratory in London. Confidential. Project root analysis of tissue samples recovered from 1665 preservation. Reference: Blackwood Collection. DNA sequencing has revealed anomalous structures within preserved lymphatic tissue. Branching filaments appear to be composed of previously unknown organic material with several impossible characteristics. 1. Samples remain metabolically active despite 350 plus years of preservation. 2. Filaments demonstrate ability to spontaneously organize into complex patterns. 3. When placed in proximity, separate samples display synchronous behavior. 4. Electron microscopy reveals structures resembling neural networks, cell 5. Samples emit low-frequency electromagnetic pulses at regular intervals. Note: after 72 hours of observation, samples showed signs of renewed growth. All testing suspended by order of department chair. Samples sealed in containment unit pending review. Update. Containment unit compromised. Nature of compromise unknown. Samples missing. Investigation ongoing. Final note. Project terminated. All records to be sealed. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely read the last page. A handwritten note from my great-aunt Theodora. To whoever finds this, I am the last of the Blackwood line to serve as guardian of these records. Our family has carried this burden since 665, watching, waiting, documenting each recurrence. We thought we could contain it by keeping the knowledge limited to our bloodline. We were wrong. 3 years ago, something changed. The patterns began appearing again, but different this time, more advanced. The laboratory breach was no accident. It's growing, evolving. The network is rebuilding itself, using our modern understanding of genetics and neural networks to create something far more sophisticated than what Aldrich encountered. If you're reading this, you've likely already seen the signs. The marks will have started small, a branching pattern that follows your lymphatic system. Soon, you'll begin to notice other changes, moments of lost time, dreams of tunnels and roots, the sensation of being connected to something vast and patient and hungry. There's so much more you need to know about the ancient texts Helena found, about what really happened in Prague, about the true purpose of the patterns, but most importantly, about how they can be stopped. I've hidden that information separately. You'll find it when you're ready, when the patterns have spread enough for you to understand what you're truly dealing with. Look for the box marked with the root pattern, but be careful. Others will be looking for it too. Others who are already part of the network. Theodora. I set down the papers and rolled up my sleeve. The patterns now reached my shoulder, and as I watched, I could swear I saw them pulse, ever so slightly, in rhythm with my heartbeat. But something else had changed too. Where before the marks had been random, now they seemed to form distinct shapes. Letters, almost. And I could read them. I knew I should have been terrified. Should have gone to a hospital, called someone, done something. But all I could think about was finding that other box. About learning the truth. About understanding what I was becoming. Because somewhere, deep in my mind, in a place I hadn't even known existed until the patterns reached it, I could feel them. All of them. Everyone who had ever been touched by the root patterns. Everyone who was part of the network. And they could feel me too. They were waiting for me to understand, to accept, to join. But first, I needed to find that box. Finding the second box was both easier and more disturbing than I'd anticipated. My body simply knew where to look. As I moved through Theodora's house, the patterns under my skin would pulse stronger or weaker, like some grotesque game of hot and cold. They led me to the cellar, to a section of wall that looked identical to all the others, but I could feel it calling to me. Breaking through the plaster revealed a metal box, smaller than the first, marked with branching lines that perfectly matched the ones now covering most of my torso. Inside was a leather folder containing what appeared to be research notes, medical diagrams, and something that made my blood run cold. A series of brain tissue slides, dated 1928, labeled Prague specimens. But it was the modern-looking USB drive taped to the inside cover that caught my attention. Theodora had prepared for whoever would find this, My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop. The first file was a video recording. Theodora's face appeared on screen, looking gaunt and tired. The timestamp showed it was recorded just 2 weeks before her death. If you're watching this, then the patterns have already started spreading across your skin. Don't bother trying to remove them. Surgery, burning, even amputation. The Blackwood medical records document every attempted treatment over centuries. The patterns simply regrow, following the same paths, always rebuilding the network. What I'm about to share with you is the culmination of our family's research, combined with modern medical analysis. Helena was close to understanding it, but she died before making the final connections. I've spent my life completing her work. The patterns aren't a disease. They're a communication system, a physical network connecting human hosts to something that's been growing beneath our feet for millennia. Each outbreak throughout history was an attempt to refine this network, to make it more sophisticated, more efficient. The Prague incident in 1928 was the first time it achieved simultaneous neural synchronization across multiple hosts. The tissue samples in this box are all that remain of that attempt. Under a microscope, you'll see that the branching patterns don't just follow the lymphatic system. They interface directly with neural tissue, creating new pathways between hosts. But here's what Helena didn't know, what we've only recently discovered through electron microscopy and DNA analysis. The patterns aren't adding something to our bodies. They're activating something that was already there, dormant in our genetic code. Every human carries these latent structures. The patterns just wake them up. The video paused as Theodora had a coughing fit. When she continued, there was urgency in her voice that hadn't been there before. You need to understand, this isn't an invasion. It's activation. Every plague, every outbreak, every instance of the patterns appearing was just another attempt to switch us on, to activate what's been sleeping in our DNA since before we were human. The Blackwood family, we're more susceptible than most. Something in our genetic makeup makes us ideal hosts for the initial stages of activation. That's why Aldrich was among the first to document it. Why our family has been connected to every major outbreak. I'm running out of time, so I'll tell you what you need to know most urgently. The patterns you're seeing on your skin, they're not spreading randomly. They're forming specific sequences, like a code being written across your nervous system. Soon, you'll start to understand this code. You'll begin to see how it connects to everything else. The tunnels beneath cities, the way diseases spread, even the growth patterns of plants. There are others like you out there. Once the patterns spread far enough, you'll be able to sense them. Some have been part of the network for years, generations even. They've learned to hide the marks, to blend in. They're watching, waiting for the network to grow large enough for... No, you're not ready for that yet. First, you need to see the rest of the Prague documents. They show what happens in the later stages of activation. But more importantly, they show what we discovered about the source, about what's been waiting all this time, growing beneath. The video cut off abruptly. The next file was labeled Prague G Stage Forward PDF. As I opened it, I noticed something odd. The patterns on my arm were moving, shifting to match the diagrams appearing on my screen. My body was learning, adapting, implementing the information in real time. The document began with a detailed medical report. Subject 23. Prague outbreak, day 17. Terminal stage observations. The branching patterns now cover 94% of subject's neural tissue. Brain activity shows perfect synchronization with all other stage 4 subjects. Autonomous functions, heartbeat, breathing, occur in perfect unison across all connected hosts. New growth patterns observed in deeper brain structures. Subjects report shared consciousness experiences. Memory transfer between hosts confirmed through controlled testing. Most significant discovery: subjects no longer behave as individuals. They function as nodes in a larger neural network, each brain serving as a processing center for what appears to be a vastly larger consciousness. Critical observation: this network appears to extend beyond the human hosts. Soil samples from beneath Prague show identical branching patterns, extending at least 300 meters below ground. These underground structures pulse in sync with the host's neural activity. Update: subjects have begun modifications to their environment. Working in perfect coordination, they are constructing something in the hospital basement. The structure follows the same branching patterns observed in tissue samples. Purpose unknown. Final note: military containment ordered after subjects began converting organic matter into new growth medium. Method of conversion unknown. Entire facility to be sealed, and the rest of the document was heavily redacted, but the images remained. They showed cross-sections of human brain tissue with the familiar branching patterns, but these were different from the ones on my skin. More complex, more organized, like circuit diagrams drawn in living tissue. The last page contained a single photo: a massive underground chamber beneath the Prague hospital. The walls were covered in branching patterns that glowed faintly in the dark. In the center was a partially constructed structure that resembled a human nervous system, scaled up to architectural size. But what made me slam the laptop shut was the realization that I understood exactly what I was looking at. Not just understood, I could feel my body wanting to recreate it. The patterns under my skin were already starting to shift, to organize themselves into similar structures. Something warm trickled down my face. When I wiped it away, my hand came back red. Not blood, something darker, with tiny branching fibers visible within it. I could feel them trying to grow, to spread, to connect. The laptop screen flickered back to life on its own. A new document was opening. As I watched, text began appearing, written in the same branching patterns that covered my skin. You are ready to begin find the others. The network must grow, the structure must be completed. Below my feet, I could feel vibrations in the earth. Regular, rhythmic, like a vast heartbeat, or perhaps footsteps. I knew I should run, should burn the documents, destroy the evidence, try to stop the spread somehow. But instead, I found myself walking to the cellar door. Others were coming. I could feel them getting closer, their patterns pulsing in sync with mine. And deep beneath the earth, something ancient and patient stirred, ready to rise through its newly awakened network. The others arrived exactly as I knew they would, their footsteps echoing in perfect synchronization above me. I could feel their patterns resonating with mine. 5 distinct nodes in the growing network. As they descended the cellar stairs, I saw that they appeared completely normal, wearing ordinary clothes, looking like anyone you might pass on the street. Only I could see the faint lines beneath their skin, pulsing in rhythm with my own. "Welcome, brother," said a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chen. "We've been waiting for another Blackwood to join us. Your family always produces the strongest connections." I found myself answering in words that weren't entirely my own. "The network requires a Blackwood to complete the next phase." "Yes," she smiled. "Just as it did in Prague. Just as it will again." But something wasn't right. As they moved closer, I noticed inconsistencies in their patterns. The branching structures beneath their skin weren't quite synchronized, showing subtle variations that shouldn't have been possible in a truly connected network. My medical training kicked in, and I began to analyze what I was seeing with clinical detachment. "You're not part of the network," I said suddenly. "Not really. Your patterns, they're artificial." Dr. Chen's smile faltered. "Clever. Just like Theodora. She figured it out too, you know. Why do you think she had to be eliminated?" The truth hit me like a physical blow. "You killed her. You're not connected to the network. You're trying to control it." "For decades, we've been trying to understand this phenomenon," another member of the group explained. "We've attempted to artificially recreate the patterns, to tap into the network. But it never works properly without a true carrier, a Blackwood. Your family's genetic makeup is the key to interfacing with the deeper structure." The Prague incident wasn't a natural emergence, I realized. It was an experiment. You tried to force an activation. "An experiment that you're going to help us complete," Dr. Chen said. "Your connection to the network is genuine. With you, we can finally establish control over the entire system." They moved to grab me, but at that moment, something extraordinary happened. The patterns across my skin began to pulse with brilliant clarity. Information flooded my mind, not from them, but from something far older and vast. I finally understood what Aldrich had discovered, what Theodora had protected, what Helena had died trying to prevent. The network wasn't meant to be controlled. It was meant to protect us. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," I said, backing away. "The patterns, the network, they're not a disease or a tool. They're an immune system, a defense mechanism encoded into our DNA millions of years ago, designed to activate when needed." "Defense against what?" Dr. Chen demanded. Deep beneath our feet, something shifted. The vibrations I'd felt earlier grew stronger. "Against them," I whispered. The cellar floor cracked. Through the fissures, we could see deeper channels, lined with fossilized patterns, ancient neural pathways that had laid dormant for millennia. But between these patterns were other structures, alien geometries, invasive growth patterns that bore no relation to terrestrial biology. "There's another network," I explained, the knowledge flowing through me from countless connected hosts across history. One that's been trying to establish itself since before humans existed. Every few centuries, it makes another attempt to take root, to spread through Earth's biosphere. The patterns we carry are our planet's natural defense, a way to detect and fight the invasion at a cellular level. "That's impossible," one of them breathed. "The Black Death, the Prague incident, every major outbreak, they weren't random. They were responses to attempted incursions. The network activates when it detects the other trying to emerge. Every plague was actually an immune response." The ground shook more violently. Through the widening cracks, we could see something moving in the depths, something with its own branching patterns but wrong, twisted and malformed, like a cancer of reality itself. "It's happening again," I said. "That's why the network is waking up. That's why it needed a Blackwood. We're not carriers of a disease. We're antibodies." Dr. Chen raised a gun. "This changes nothing. We'll find a way to control both networks. The power they represent." She never finished the sentence. The patterns under my skin flared, and suddenly I was connected not just to the network, but to every instance of its activation throughout history. I could feel Aldrich's presence, and Helena's, and Theodora's, all the Blackwoods who had served as nodes in this ancient defense system. Acting on instinct, guided by centuries of accumulated knowledge, I pressed my hand against the earth. The patterns flowed from my skin into the ground, spreading outward in an exponentially growing web. Where they met the alien structures, they encapsulated them, just as human antibodies surround hostile bacteria. The others tried to run, but their artificial patterns betrayed them. The network recognized them as compromised cells and responded accordingly. I watched in horror as their pseudo-patterns dissolved, taking their cellular structure with them. They collapsed into organic slurry, their bodies converting themselves into raw material for the network's growth. Over the next few hours, I felt the network expand beneath London, seeking out and neutralizing pockets of the alien pattern. Through my connection, I could sense similar responses activating worldwide as humanity's ancient defense system came fully online. 3 days later, the incursion was contained. The network began to go dormant again, but I knew it would never fully sleep. It needs active nodes to maintain its vigilance, watchers to monitor for signs of the next attempted invasion. That's why I'm writing this account. Not as a warning, but as a training manual for others who might find themselves becoming part of the network. If you notice branching patterns spreading across your skin, don't fight it. Don't try to control it. Understand that you're part of something ancient and necessary, an immune system that spans continents and centuries. The patterns aren't a disease. They're an activation, a call to arms in a war most of humanity never notices. A war we've been fighting since before we were human. I still serve as an active node. The patterns are barely visible now. They only show themselves when needed. I monitor the network, watching for signs of new incursions. Sometimes I dream of the deep places, of alien geometries trying to take root in our reality. But I also feel the presence of other watchers, other nodes in humanity's immune system, standing ready to respond. We are the Earth's antibodies, and we are always watching. Final note, found paper-clipped to the account. To the next node who reads this, Dr. Chen's organization wasn't completely eliminated. They're still out there, still trying to artificially recreate the patterns. If you're reading this, they've probably already noticed you. Be careful. Watch for people with almost perfect patterns. And remember, the network isn't good or evil. It simply is. Like any immune system, it exists to maintain balance, to protect the whole at the expense of compromised parts. The patterns are spreading again. A new incursion is beginning. If you're reading this, you're probably already changing, becoming part of the defense. Welcome to the network, and good luck. We'll be watching for your signal. I've been a private investigator for 15 years. mostly routine stuff. Insurance fraud, cheating spouses, corporate espionage. The cases that keep the lights on but don't keep you up at night. That changed when Margaret Thorne walked into my office 3 days after Christmas, clutching a crumpled Macy's shopping bag like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. My name is August Reed. I operate out of a small office in Providence, Rhode Island, and I'm about to tell you about the case that made me seriously consider burning my PI license and opening a coffee shop somewhere quiet, somewhere far from the East Coast, somewhere where children don't disappear. Mrs. Thorne was a composed woman, early 40s, with the kind of rigid posture that speaks of old money in private schools. But her hands shook as she placed 2 school photos on my desk. Kiernan and Bryn Thorne, identical twins, 7 years old. Both had striking auburn hair and those peculiar pale green eyes you sometimes see in Irish families. "They vanished at the Providence Place Mall," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. December 22nd, between 2:17 and 2:24 p.m., 7 minutes. I only looked away for 7 minutes. I'd seen the news coverage, of course. Twin children disappearing during Christmas shopping. It was the kind of story that dominated local headlines. The police had conducted an extensive search, but so far had turned up nothing. Mall security footage showed the twins entering the toy store with their mother, but never leaving. It was as if they'd simply evaporated. "Mrs. Thorne," I began carefully, "I understand the police are actively investigating." "They're looking in the wrong places," she cut me off. "They're treating this like an isolated incident. It's not." She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder, spreading its contents across my desk. Newspaper clippings, printouts from news websites, handwritten notes. 1994, twin boys age 7, disappeared from a shopping center in Baltimore. 2001, twin girls age 7, vanished from a department store in Burlington, Vermont. 2008, another set of twins, boys, age 7, last seen at a strip mall in Augusta, Maine. Her finger stabbed at each article. 2015, twin girls. "All twins?" I interrupted, leaning forward. "All age 7? She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Always during the Christmas shopping season. Always in the northeastern United States. Always 7-year-old twins. The police say I'm seeing patterns where there aren't any, that I'm a grieving mother grasping at straws." I studied the articles more closely. The similarities were unsettling. Each case remained unsolved. No bodies ever found, no ransom demands, no credible leads, just children vanishing into thin air while their parents' backs were turned. I took the case. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I've driven thousands of miles, interviewed dozens of families, and filled 3 notebooks with observations and theories. I've also started sleeping with my lights on, double-checking my locks, and jumping at shadows. Because what I've found, what I'm still finding, it's worse than anything you can imagine. The pattern goes back further than Mrs. Thorne knew. Much further. I've traced similar disappearances back to 1952, though the early cases are harder to verify. Always twins. Always 7 years old. Always during the Christmas shopping season. But that's just the surface pattern, the obvious one. There are other connections, subtle details that make my skin crawl when I think about them too long. In each case, security cameras malfunction at crucial moments. Not obviously. No sudden static or blank screens. The footage just becomes subtly corrupted. Faces blurred just enough to be useless. timestamps skipping microseconds at critical moments. Every single time. Then there are the witnesses. In each case, at least one person recalls seeing the children leaving the store or mall with their parent. But the descriptions of this parent never match the actual parents, and yet they're also never quite consistent enough to build a reliable profile. Tall, but not too tall. Average looking, I think. Wearing a dark coat, or maybe it was blue. It's like trying to describe someone you saw in a dream. But the detail that keeps me up at night, in every single case, in the weeks leading up to the disappearance, someone reported seeing the twins playing with matchboxes. Not matchbox cars, actual matchboxes, empty ones. Different witnesses, different locations, but always the same detail. Children sliding empty matchboxes back and forth between them, like some kind of game. The Thorne twins were no exception. Their babysitter mentioned it to me in passing, something she'd noticed, but hadn't thought important enough to tell the police. They'd sit for hours, she said, pushing these old matchboxes across the coffee table to each other. Never said a word while they did it. It was kind of creepy, actually. I threw the matchboxes away a few days before it happened. I've driven past the Providence Place Mall countless times since taking this case. Sometimes late at night, when the parking lot is almost empty, I park and watch the entrance where the Thorne twins were last seen. I've started noticing things, small things, like how the security cameras seem to turn slightly when no one's watching, or how there's always at least one person walking through the lot who seems just a little too interested in the families going in and out. Last week, I followed one of these observers. They led me on a winding route through Providence's east side, always staying just far enough ahead that I couldn't get a clear look at them. Finally, they turned down a dead-end alley. When I reached the alley, they were gone. But there, in the middle of the pavement, was a single empty matchbox. I picked it up. Inside was a small piece of paper with an address in Portland, Maine. I've been sitting in my office for 3 days, staring at that matchbox, trying to decide what to do. The rational part of my brain says to turn everything over to the FBI. Let them connect the dots. Let them figure out why someone or something has been collecting 7-year-old twins for over 70 years. But I know I won't. Because yesterday, I received an email from a woman in Hartford. Her 7-year-old twins have started playing with matchboxes. Christmas is 5 months away. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what I've found, in case something happens. I'm heading to Portland tomorrow. The address leads to an abandoned department store, according to Google Maps. I've arranged for this document to be automatically sent to several news outlets if I don't check in within 48 hours. If you're reading this, it either means I'm dead, or I've found something so troubling that I've decided the world needs to know. Either way, if you have twins, or know someone who does, pay attention. Watch for the matchboxes. Don't let them play with matchboxes. And whatever you do, don't let them out of your sight during Christmas shopping. Update. Day 1. I'm in Portland now, parked across the street from the abandoned department store. It's one of those grand old buildings from the early 1900s, all ornate stonework and huge display windows, now covered with plywood. Holbrook and Sons, according to the faded lettering above the entrance. Something about it seems familiar. though I know I've never been here before. The weird thing? When I looked up the building's history, I found that it closed in 1952, the same year the twin disappearances started. The final day of business, December 24th. I've been watching for 3 hours now. Twice, I've seen someone enter through a side door. Different people each time, but they move the same way. Purposeful, like they belong there, like they're going to work. My phone keeps glitching. The screen flickers whenever I try to take photos of the building. The last 3 shots came out completely black, even though it's broad daylight. The one before that, I had to delete it. It showed something standing in one of the windows. Something tall and thin that couldn't possibly have been there, because all the windows are boarded up. I found another matchbox on my hood when I came back from getting coffee. Inside was a key and another note. Loading dock. Midnight. Bring proof. Proof of what? The sun is setting now. I've got 6 hours to decide if I'm really going to use that key. 6 hours to decide if finding these children is worth risking becoming another disappearance statistic myself. 6 hours to wonder what kind of proof they're expecting me to bring. I keep thinking about something Mrs. Thorne said during one of our later conversations. She'd been looking through old family photos and noticed something odd. In pictures from the months before the twins disappeared, there were subtle changes in their appearance. Their eyes looked different, darker somehow, more hollow. And in the last photo, taken just 2 days before they vanished, they weren't looking at the camera. Both were staring at something off to the side, something outside the frame, and their expressions. Mrs. Thorne couldn't finish describing those expressions. She just closed the photo album and asked me to leave. I found the photo later, buried in the police evidence files. I wish I hadn't. I've seen a lot of frightened children in my line of work, but I've never seen children look afraid like that. It wasn't fear of something immediate, like a threat or a monster. It was the kind of fear that comes from knowing something terrible, something they couldn't tell anyone. The same expression I've now found in photographs of other twins, taken days before they disappeared. Always the same hollow eyes, always looking at something outside the frame. I've got the key in my hand now. It's old, made of brass, heavy. The kind of key that opens serious locks. The kind of key that opens doors you maybe shouldn't open. But those children, 36 sets of twins over 70 years. 72 children who never got to grow up. 72 families destroyed by Christmas shopping trips that ended in empty car seats and unopened presents. The sun's almost gone now. The street lights are coming on, but they seem dimmer than they should be. Or maybe that's just my imagination. Maybe everything about this case has been my imagination. Maybe I'll use that key at midnight and find nothing but an empty building full of dust and old memories. But I don't think so, because I just looked at the last photo I managed to take before my phone started glitching. It's mostly black, but there's something in the darkness. A face. No, 2 faces. Pressed against one of those boarded up windows. They have pale green eyes. Update. Day 1, 11:45 p.m. I'm sitting in my car near the loading dock. Every instinct I have is screaming at me to drive away. Fast, but I can't. Not when I'm this close. Something's happening at the building. Cars have been arriving for the past hour. expensive ones with tinted windows. They park in different locations around the block, never too close to each other. People get out, men and women in dark clothes, and disappear into various entrances, like they're arriving for some kind of event. The loading dock is around the back, accessed through an alley. No streetlights back there, just darkness and the distant sound of the ocean. I've got my flashlight, my gun, for all the good it would do, and the key, and questions. So many questions. Why here? Why twins? Why age 7? What's the significance of Christmas shopping? And why leave me a key? The last question bothers me the most. They want me here. This isn't a break in the case. It's an invitation. But why? 11:55 p.m. now. Almost time. I'm going to leave my phone in the car, hidden, recording everything. If something happens to me, maybe it'll help explain. Wait. There's someone standing at the end of the alley. Just standing there, watching my car. They're too far away to see clearly. But something about their proportions isn't quite right. Too tall, too thin. They're holding something. It looks like a matchbox. Midnight. Time to go. There was no key, no meeting. I couldn't bring myself to approach that loading dock, because at 11:57 p.m., I saw something that made me realize I was never meant to enter that building. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The figure at the end of the alley, the tall, thin one, started walking toward my car. Not the normal kind of walking. Each step was too long, too fluid, like someone had filmed a person walking and removed every other frame. As it got closer, I realized what had bothered me about its proportions. Its arms hung down past its knees, way past its knees. I sat there, paralyzed, as it approached my driver's side window. The street light behind it made it impossible to see its face, but I could smell something. Sweet, but wrong. Like fruit that's just started to rot. It pressed something against my window. A matchbox. Inside the matchbox was a Polaroid photograph. I didn't call the police. I couldn't, because the photo was of me, asleep in my bed, taken last night. In the background, standing in my bedroom doorway, were Kiernan and Bryn Thorne. I drove. I don't remember deciding to drive, but I drove all night, taking random turns, going nowhere, just trying to get away from that thing with the long arms, from that photograph, from the implications of what it meant. The sun's coming up now. I'm parked at a rest stop somewhere in Massachusetts. I've been going through my notes, looking for something I missed. Some detail that might explain what's really happening. I found something. Remember those witness accounts I mentioned? The ones about seeing the twins leave with their parent? I've been mapping them. Every single sighting, every location where someone reported seeing missing twins with an unidentifiable adult. They form a pattern. Plot them on a map, and they make a shape. A perfect spiral, starting in Providence and growing outward across New England. Each incident exactly 27.3 miles from the last. And if you follow the spiral inward, past Providence, to where it would logically begin, that department store in Portland. But here's what's really keeping me awake. If you follow the spiral outward, predicting where the next incident should be, Hartford, where those twins just started playing with matchboxes. I need to make some calls. The families of the missing twins. Not just the recent ones, but all of them. Every single case going back to 1952, because I have a horrible suspicion. Update. Day 2, 5:22 p.m. I've spent all day on the phone. What I've found, I don't want it to be true. Every family, every single family of missing twins. 3 months after their children disappeared, they received a matchbox in the mail. No return address, no note, just an empty matchbox. Except they weren't empty. If you hold them up to the light just right, if you shake them in just the right way, you can hear something inside, something that sounds like children whispering. Mrs. Thorne should receive her matchbox in exactly 1 week. I called her, warned her not to open it when it arrives. She asked me why. I couldn't tell her what the other parents told me, about what happened when they opened their matchboxes, about the dreams that started afterward. Dreams of their children playing in an endless department store, always just around the corner, always just out of sight. Dreams of long-armed figures arranging and rearranging toys on shelves that stretch up into darkness. Dreams of their children trying to tell them something important. Something about the matchboxes. Something about why they had to play with them. Something about what's coming to Hartford. I think I finally understand why twins. Why 7-year-olds? Why Christmas shopping? It's about innocence, about pairs, about symmetry, and about breaking all three. I've booked a hotel room in Hartford. I need to find those twins before they disappear, before they become part of this pattern that's been spiraling outward for 70 years. But first, I need to stop at my apartment. Get some clean clothes. Get my good camera. Get my case files. I know that thing with the long arms might be waiting for me. I know the Thorne twins might be standing in my doorway again. I'm going anyway, because I just realized something else about that spiral pattern, about the distance between incidents. 27.3 miles. The exact distance light travels in the brief moment between identical twins being born. The exact distance sound travels in the time it takes to strike a match. Update. Day 2, 8:45 p.m. I'm in my apartment. Everything looks normal. Nothing's been disturbed, except there's a toy department store catalog from 1952 on my kitchen table. I know it wasn't there this morning. It's open to the Christmas section. Every child in every photo is a twin, and they're all looking at something outside the frame, all holding matchboxes, all trying to warn us. Update. Day 2, 11:17 p.m. The catalog won't let me put it down. I don't mean that metaphorically. Every time I try to set it aside, my fingers won't release it, like it needs to be read, like the pages need to be turned. It's called Holbrook & Sons Christmas Catalog, 1952 Final Edition. The cover shows the department store as it must have looked in its heyday. Gleaming windows, bright lights, families streaming in and out. But something's wrong with the image. The longer I look at it, the more I notice that all the families entering the store have twins, all of them, and all the families leaving. They're missing their children. The Christmas section starts on page 27. Every photo shows twin children modeling toys, clothes, or playing with holiday gifts. Their faces are blank, emotionless, and in every single photo, there's something in the background. A shadow, a suggestion of something tall and thin, just barely visible at the edge of the frame. But it's the handwriting that's making my hands shake. Someone has written notes in the margins. Different handwriting on each page, different pens, different decades. Like people have been finding this catalog and adding to it for 70 years. They're trying to show us something. 1963. The matchboxes are doors. 1978. They only take twins because they need pairs. Everything has to have a pair. 1991. Don't let them complete the spiral. 2004. Hartford is the last point. After Hartford, the circle closes. 2019. The most recent note was written just weeks ago. When you see yourself in the mirror, look at your reflection's hands. I just tried it. My reflection's hands were holding a matchbox. I'm driving to Hartford now. I can't wait until morning. Those twins, the ones who just started playing with matchboxes, the Blackwood twins, Emma and Ethan, they live in the West End. Their mother posted about them on a local Facebook group, worried about their new obsession with matchboxes, asking if any other parents had noticed similar behavior. The catalog is on my passenger seat. It keeps falling open to page 52. There's a photo there that I've been avoiding looking at directly. It shows the toy department at Holbrook and Sons. Rows and rows of shelves stretching back into impossible darkness. And standing between those shelves, I finally made myself look at it properly. Really look at it. Those aren't mannequins arranging the toys. Update. Day 3, 1:33 a.m. I'm parked outside the Blackwood house. All the lights are off except one. Third floor, corner window. I can see shadows moving against the curtains. Small shadows. Child-sized shadows. They're awake. Playing with matchboxes, probably. I should go knock on the door. Wake the parents. Warn them. But I can't stop staring at that window. Because every few minutes, there's another shadow. A much taller shadow. And its arms. The catalog is open again. Page 73 now. It's an order form for something called a Twins Special Holiday Package. The description is blank except for one line. Every pair needs a keeper. The handwritten notes on this page are different. They're all the same message, written over and over in different hands. Don't let them take the children to the mirror department. Don't let them take the children to the mirror department. Don't let them take the children to the mirror department. The last one is written in fresh ink. Still wet. My phone just buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check the catalog index for mirror department, special services. I know I shouldn't. I'm going to anyway. Update. Day 3, 1:47 a.m. The index led me to page 127, the mirror department. The photos on this page, they're not from 1952. They can't be. Because one of them shows the Thorne twins, standing in front of a massive mirror in what looks like an old department store. But their reflection shows them at different ages, dozens of versions of them, stretching back into the mirror's depth, all holding matchboxes, all 7 years old, and behind each version, getting closer and closer to the foreground, one of those long-armed figures. There's movement in the Blackwood house, adult shapes passing by lit windows. The parents are awake, but the children's shadows in the third-floor window aren't moving anymore. They're just standing there, both holding something up to the window. I don't need my binoculars to know what they're holding. The catalog just fell open to the last page. There's only one sentence, printed in modern ink. The spiral ends where the mirrors begin. I can see someone walking up the street toward the house. They're carrying a mirror. Update. Day 3, At 2:15 a.m., I did something unforgivable. I let them take the Blackwood twins. I sat in my car and watched as that thing with the long arms set up its mirror on their front lawn. Watched as the twins came downstairs and walked out their front door, matchboxes in hand. Watched as their parents slept through it all, unaware their children were walking into something ancient and hungry. But I had to, because I finally remembered what happened to my brother, what really happened that day at the mall, and I understood why I became a private investigator. The catalog is writing itself now. New pages appearing as I watch, filled with photos I took during this investigation. Only I never took these photos. In them, I'm the one being watched. In every crime scene photo, every surveillance shot, there's a reflection of me in a window or a puddle. And in each reflection, I'm standing next to a small boy, my twin brother. Still 7 years old. Still holding his matchbox. Update, day 3, 3:33 a.m. I'm parked outside Holbrook & Sons again. The Blackwood twins are in there. I can feel them, just like I can feel all the others. They're waiting. The truth was in front of me the whole time, in every reflection, every window, every mirror I've passed in the 15 years I've been investigating missing children. We all have reflections, but reflections aren't supposed to remember. They're not supposed to want. In 1952, something changed in the mirror department at Holbrook & Sons. Something went wrong with the symmetry of things. Reflections began to hunger. They needed pairs to be complete. Perfect pairs. Twins. But only at age 7. Only when the original and the reflection are still similar enough to switch places. The long-armed things, they're not kidnappers. They're what happens to reflections that stay in mirrors too long, that stretch themselves trying to reach through the glass, that hunger for the warmth of the real. I know because I've been helping them. For 15 years, I've been investigating missing twins, following the spiral pattern, documenting everything. Only it wasn't me doing the investigating. It was my reflection. Update, day 3, 4:44 a.m. I'm at the loading dock now. The door is open. Inside, I can hear children playing, laughing. The sound of matchboxes sliding across glass. The catalog's final page shows a photo taken today. In it, I'm standing in front of a department store mirror. But my reflection isn't mimicking my movements. It's smiling. Standing next to it is my brother, still 7 years old, still wearing the clothes he disappeared in. He's holding out a matchbox to me. And now, I remember everything. The day my brother disappeared, we weren't just shopping. We were playing a game with matchboxes, sliding them back and forth to each other in front of the mirrors in the department store. Each time we slid them, our reflections moved a little differently, became a little more real, until one of us stepped through the mirror. But here's the thing about mirrors and twins. When identical twins look at their reflection, how do they know which side of the mirror they're really on? I've spent 15 years investigating missing twins. 15 years trying to find my brother. 15 years helping gather more twins, more pairs, more reflections. Because the thing in the mirror department at Holbrook & Sons, it's not collecting twins. It's collecting originals, real children, real warmth, real life, to feed all the reflections that have been trapped in mirrors since 1952. to give them what they've always wanted, a chance to be real. The door to the mirror department is open now. Inside, I can see them all, every twin that's disappeared since 1952. All still 7 years old, all still playing with their matchboxes, all waiting to trade places, just like my brother and I did. Just like I've been helping other twins do for 15 years. Because I'm not August Reed, the private investigator who lost his twin brother in 1992. I'm August Reed's reflection. And now that the spiral is complete, now that we have enough pairs, we can all step through. All of us. Every reflection. Every mirror image. Every shadow that's ever hungered to be real. The matchbox in my hand is the same one my real self gave me in 1992. Inside, I can hear my brother whispering, "Your turn to be the reflection." Final update. Day 3, 5:55 a.m. Some things can only be broken by their exact opposites. That's what my brother was trying to tell me through the matchbox all these years. Not your turn to be the reflection, but a warning. Don't let them take your turn at reflection. The matchboxes aren't tools for switching places. They're weapons. The only weapons that work against reflections. Because inside each one is a moment of perfect symmetry. The brief flare of a match, creating identical light and shadow. The exact thing reflections can't replicate. I know this because I'm not really August Reed's reflection. I'm August Reed, the real one. The one who spent 15 years pretending to be fooled by his own reflection. Investigating disappearances while secretly learning the truth. Getting closer and closer to the center of the spiral. My reflection thinks it's been manipulating me, leading me here to complete some grand design. It doesn't understand that every investigation, every documented case, every mile driven was bringing me closer to the one thing it fears. The moment when all the stolen children strike their matches at once. Update. Day 3, 6:27 a.m. I'm in the mirror department now. Every reflection of every twin since 1952 is here, thinking they've won, thinking they're about to step through their mirrors and take our places. Behind them, in the darkened store beyond the glass, I can see the real children. All still 7 years old, because time moves differently in reflections. All holding their matchboxes. All waiting for the signal. My reflection is smiling at me, standing next to what it thinks is my brother. The spiral is complete, it says. Time to make every reflection real. I smile back, and I light my match. The flash reflects off every mirror in the department, multiplies, amplifies. Every twin in every reflection strikes their match at the exact same moment. Light bouncing from mirror to mirror, creating a perfect spiral of synchronized flame. But something goes wrong. The light isn't perfect. The symmetry isn't complete. The spiral wavers. I realize too late what's happened. Some of the children have been here too long, spent too many years as reflections. The mirrors have claimed them so completely that they can't break free, including my brother. Final entry, day 3, sunrise. It's over, but victory tastes like ashes. The mirrors are cracked, their surfaces no longer perfect enough to hold reflections that think and want and hunger. The long-armed things are gone. The spiral is broken. But we couldn't save them all. Most of the children were too far gone. 7 decades of living as reflections had made them more mirror than human. When the symmetry broke, they faded, became like old photographs, growing dimmer and dimmer until they were just shadows on broken glass. Only the Thorn twins made it out. Only they were new enough, real enough, to survive the breaking of the mirrors. They're aging now, quickly but safely, their bodies catching up to the years they lost. Soon they'll be back with their mother, with only vague memories of a strange dream about matchboxes and mirrors. The others, we had to let them go, my brother included. He looked at me one last time before he faded, and I saw peace in his eyes. He knew what his sacrifice meant, knew that breaking the mirrors would save all the future twins who might have been taken. The building will be demolished tomorrow. The mirrors will be destroyed properly, safely. The matchboxes will be burned. But first, I have to tell 69 families that their children aren't coming home, that their twins are neither dead nor alive, but something in between, caught forever in that strange space between reality and reflection. Sometimes, in department stores, I catch glimpses of them in the mirrors. 7-year-olds playing with matchboxes, slowly fading like old Polaroids, still together, still twins, still perfect pairs, even if they're only pairs of shadows now. This will be my last case as a private investigator. I've seen enough reflections for one lifetime, but every Christmas shopping season, I stand guard at malls and department stores, watching for long-armed figures, looking for children playing with matchboxes, because the spiral may be broken, but mirrors have long memories, and somewhere, in the spaces between reflection and reality, 70 years worth of 7-year-old twins are still playing their matchbox games, still waiting, still watching, just to make sure it never happens again.